Hey guys, Alan Bishop here with the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, your source for all things distillation related. Whether that be home distilling and or professional distilling, it doesn't matter, it's all the same art form to me. Part of an art form that goes back a very long time and is related to spiritualism and a key to opening a door, something that I'm very proud to be a part of, and be able to create unique and fun and cool things for people. So a couple things I want to touch on today. The first thing is the difference between barrels and barrel alternatives, and some of the things you might want to look out for when you are using either barrels and or barrel alternatives. Some of the differences and the differences in approach that I've found useful over the years, etc. But the first thing I want to touch on is, I don't want this to become the whining self-help channel. So distillation has always been my form of therapy, the thing that helps keep me grounded, helps me with my spirituality, and helps keep me a part of this world for sure. Not the drinking, but the actual art of distillation, which is a huge part of my life. I think about it every day. I'm a part of it every day, whether it's the actual art of distilling, the philosophy of distilling, the history of distilling, these videos, writing, the podcast, etc., or work. I mean, it's all one and the same to me, right? So, the past couple weeks have been a little rough. First, my mom and dad had COVID. They did fine with that. Then my mom slipped on her shoestring somehow. I haven't figured that out yet, and she fell and broke her nose. And then I got in a hit and run accident. And then my mother-in-law, Diane Ratz, she passed away. She lost her battle with cancer that she'd been fighting for a year. And a lot of people say, hey, maybe now's the time to step away from this. I can't. This is my therapy, guys. This is what I do, and this is the thing that she would have been wanting me to do, and my wife as well, is to continue on, doing the things that we're passionate about, that we love, and the things that we make money off of, too. So that being said, we just recently uploaded a apple palinka distillation video that we dedicated to her. I want to dedicate this video to her too and tell you a little bit about her. So she'd been widowed for about 10 years. Her husband Dale had also passed away from cancer. She did as well. And they were good, salt of the earth people. They raised a hell of a daughter, and my wife Kimberly, and her brother and sister Christopher and Corey Ratz. And Diane didn't have it easy. Her mom passed away when she was, I believe, 13 years old, so she had to really raise her sister and her brothers as well. And she did a hell of a job. She put all of her heart and soul into everything she did. She loved to read. She always had her nose in a book, always reading, and really encouraged that. She was a very outspoken woman. She had an opinion on everything, and she really didn't give a shit whether you liked her opinion or not, and she would tell you that. And that's one of the things I always appreciated about her and about Dale as well. She also did a great job helping raise my daughter, Penny. Penny's 7 now, and Diane has been a huge part of her life, up to this point. So, it's on us, it's on the people who live to make sure that, those who pass, that their light doesn't dim any, doesn't go away, and that they keep illuminating the path. And we fully intend to do that and pay tribute to Diane as much as possible. So, I just want to take a few moments and say some things about her, and we love her, that's for sure, and we always will. We won't forget her, never ever. So all that being said, let's get into today's subject. No, I'm not on the verge of crying. I have a loose booger. I don't know if you've ever had one of those. That's probably not an appropriate thing to say on a video, but thought I should at least tell you, because I might sneeze in the middle of this video. I'm also keep side-eyeing the camera on my phone, because you guys complained enough about the picture box setting, because I was flipping my phone the other direction, that I turned my phone on the side and got new video editing software. The problem is the camera is over here, and so every time I look at the phone, I habitually want to go, and it looks funny on video. So bear that in mind as well. Anyways, as far as barrels go, let's start with barrels as opposed to wood alternatives first, because honestly, I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on barrels, dealing with them every day at my job at a legal distillery. We don't use any small barrels whatsoever at the distillery that I work at, and not that we wouldn't, because we certainly would. I've had bourbons out of, and we're relegating this first part particularly to bourbons and rye whiskeys, things that require new American oak barrels. I've had good whiskeys out of 30-gallon barrels, and I've had good whiskeys out of 15-gallon barrels. I've had very few good whiskeys, or what I would consider even marginally drinkable whiskeys, out of other size barrels, 25s, 30s, and 15s. 5s are not, you couldn't pay me enough to use 5s, but that's just me, personally. Now, one of the things I want to point out to you guys is obviously bourbon and rye, wheat, etc. They require the use of a new American oak barrel. And we are coming up on a time where I foresee that we are going to run out of new American oak. Nobody has said it yet, but it's coming. And I can tell you as a craft distiller, it is getting very hard to get a hold of new American oak barrels. Because the big guys have expanded so much and there's so many new big guys opening up that they have kind of put the kibosh on anyone else buying barrels. Everybody's having barrel shortage issues. Now, you'll hear it out of the barrel makers that, oh, people can't get logs out because it's wet. Listen, it was dry as shit here most of the year in Indiana and Kentucky in particular. So I don't buy into that at all. You know, I see the environment as well as anybody else does, and I know a little bit about agriculture and agroforestry and all that stuff, so I'm not buying into that. Nonetheless, whatever the reason is, one thing I would love to see happen is to go back to the days with bourbon and rye making where we could use a recouped or a rejuvenated barrel. And that was common back in the day. You know, if you take your barrel to a good cooper, he can take the head out of that barrel, shave 1/8 of an inch off the inside of it, rechar it, and you'll have at least 95% of what you would have with a new oak barrel. I know this because we've done it at my distillery, and we also did it at my previous employer at Copper and Kings quite often. Obviously never with bourbon, but with brandies and things of that nature, and it worked out fantastic. I see no reason why we wouldn't want to do that, why we wouldn't want to encourage the reuse of our barrels. Yes, they do reuse them. Yes, they do ship them to Scotland, Ireland, etc. Why would we bother shipping them out if we can use them right here in the good old US of A? There are resources. We ought to be using them. I'm just saying, guys. And I feel that way about French oak. French oak shouldn't be leaving Europe. Shouldn't be leaving France, really, or wherever it's wherever they're harvesting it from. One of the other things I want to point out is a lot of you guys who are buying barrels, you need to be very conscientious of how long that wood has been air dried, not kiln dried, air seasoned. You want good air seasoned wood. Back before Prohibition, 36 to 48 months was the gold standard, and everybody tried to get that. Nowadays, you're lucky if you can find 24 months. I have had a great source of 24 month up until recently, but nowadays I can't even get guaranteed that I'm getting 24 month air seasoned staves from the cooperages that I'm working with because there's just not enough of it out there. So I'm getting some barrels that have some staves in them that are 24 month and some that are 12 month. I'm not real fond of that because that is going to change my flavor profile of my whiskey in the coming years. And I would like to keep that as consistent as what I possibly can. I'm already dealing with a pot still, so I'm going to have to blend everything in a very specific way that people running a low rec column still don't have to blend it. It's an entirely different ball game for me than it is for one of the big distilleries. So this goes for both barrels as well as barrel alternatives such as cubes and or chips and or spirals or any of those things. Make sure you're getting 18, 24 month, 36 month, whatever that you can get. Make sure that's what you're getting in your oak. You don't want young oak, and I'm going to tell you why. So you ever open a can of black olives and eat a black olive and notice it tastes like the can? There's a sour, sappy, resinous note that happens in young wood like that has that same exact effect, in my opinion. That's the biggest flaw I find in a lot of craft whiskeys. Even the ones that are in small barrels that otherwise would be a good whiskey, if they're not tannic because they've let it go too long, they almost always have that black olive metallic note to them. That's a flaw with the wood. It's a flaw with the seasoning of the wood in particular. One of the other things you guys might consider is that when you're looking at barrels, you're looking at 3 char and 4 char, and you guys are looking at the big distilleries going, well, they use 3 and 4 char, that's what I ought to use. Bear in mind that the big distilleries are all running low rectification Kentucky column stills. A low rec Kentucky column still does not work the same way as a pot still or even a coffee column still. A low rec Kentucky column, basically, everything that goes into it is ethanol, right? As far as alcohol, right? There's no cuts, there's no heads, hearts, tails, etc. What they do is they tune their still. That's what they call it, tuning. They tune their still, and by tuning, what they mean is they control the flow of water into the condenser, allowing some of those volatile elements they may not otherwise want to be able to vaporize into the atmosphere. This is why when you pull up somewhere like Buffalo Trace, you get out of your car, you're like, why does it smell like fingernail polish remover out here? It's because they're vaporizing all that stuff to the outside atmosphere, or as much of that stuff as they can. They cannot completely remove that quote-unquote heads cut. Those stills do not work the same as a pot still. There is no discernible cut like that. One of the ways they get around that is by going to a 3 char and or a 4 char and going into those warehouses where they have the huge temperature swings between hot and cold. What that does is it forces the whiskey into and out of the barrel. It also vaporizes some of the whiskey to the atmosphere over time. And that charcoal is doing exactly what charcoal has always done when it's used in conjunction with liquid. It's not flavoring it. It's filtering it. It's filtering out those congeners that they don't want. those elements that they don't want that they leave in the whiskey because of the way that a column still works. That's what it's doing. The flavor is coming from the toast level underneath the char and in the barrel heads. That toast level is what's going to give you your sugar content, and it's what's going to give you your unique flavor profiles like vanilla, caramel, the things that you associate with bourbon. Honestly, for a pot still, if you're good at making your cuts and you understand how to make your cuts and you understand what to leave, what not to leave a little of this, take a little of that, a number 2 char, number 1 char will do you just fine. You can focus a little bit more on the toast aspect of it. The other thing is the proofing going into the barrel. So pre-prohibition, your proof in the barrel was close to 100 proof, as close as possible. Sometimes 104, 105, somewhere in there. And the rationale behind that is because back in those days, people weren't really putting their whiskey in bottles unless they were a great big company. So they're selling barrels of various sizes to the various accounts they had, whether it be hotels or stores or restaurants or whatever it would be. And they wanted that whiskey to be in that barrel after maturation to come out as close to 100 proof as it could, because 100 proof was a mark of quality, right? So one of the things that the pre-pro distillers did is they often, not on brandies almost always went in at full proof off the still, but on bourbons and rye whiskeys, etc., they'd go in at that low entry proof so that they knew that when that warehouse came out of maturation, if it dropped proof, it probably wasn't going to be underneath 100 proof, and if it raised proof, it probably wasn't going to go up much higher than 114 or so. So you're going to be right in the ballpark of 100 proof, roughly. The other thing that does is water is actually a better solvent on wood than ethanol is. So you're able to break down more of the wood cellulose with water than you can with ethanol. It also destabilizes the ethanol just slightly, so you get oxidation a little quicker. You're not aging faster, you're aging quite differently is what you're doing. You're destabilizing that alcohol. That number 2 char, by the way, instead of a 3 or 4, is going to give you a little bit more lignin contact, and subsequently you're going to get more of a toasted coconut, toasted hazelnut sort of aroma and flavor out of it, as opposed to a caramel and vanilla. If you want the caramel and vanilla, you can always use distiller's malt from the get-go and get some of those flavors to start off with, or even add some other different types of wood in to get that vanilla sort of thing going on. So I think that kind of covers the barrel thing for the most part. I will say this with barrels, guys. Some of you asked me about maturing barrels and how you would handle that. I would consider what you're maturing in that barrel, right? If you got a high rye content, you might want those high and low temperatures. Maybe put it in an outside shed somewhere, let it get hot, let it get cold, right? Or force the heating and cooling depending on the size of your barrel. If you got something a little more volatile, something's got a lot of oats in it, something's got buckwheat, kasha, or even a brandy, I would put that in a place where the temperature is not going to fluctuate nearly as much, maybe 30 to 40 degree differentials throughout the year. It's going to greatly affect the volatility of the spirit that you're creating. Some of those things like apple and oats, etc. If you get too hot with them, you're going to drive off the aroma. If you lose the aroma, you've lost the actual flavor of what you distilled and the point of distilling that raw material in the first place. Now, with wood alternatives, this is something I don't know as much about, but I am a believer in. So a lot of distillers will tell you, don't bother with them. They don't make good product. You're never going to get the same as a barrel, etc. What I will tell you is this, and I'll do some videos on different things I've done over time as well, too. I think this country has a problem in that we way overproduce bourbon. And if we haven't overproduced bourbon yet, we're about to. There's a lot of new big distilleries opening and or big distilleries expanding. Craft distillers, take heed. If you're getting ready to get into this industry, there ain't nothing wrong with making a bourbon or two. I would not make that my business focus right now. I can tell you that everybody and their brother is in the bourbon industry. Go to Total Wine. What do you have? You walk in, go to the bourbon aisle. You have an aisle on the right-hand side, aisle on the left-hand side, and it might be 2 to 3 aisles long, all the way down. How does a consumer find a new bourbon? Why do they care about your bourbon, especially if it's not something different or unique? Even if it's different or unique, does it have a good story? Does it have a great label design? And has anybody who is a great reviewer reviewed your product and told the world about it? Because if not, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to move bourbon. When it comes to barrel alternatives in bourbon, my opinion, this is where people get disappointed. They use a barrel alternative, whether they are a craft distiller and or they are a home distiller, thinking that it's going to make it taste like bourbon. You're looking at it wrong. Don't use them for bourbon. Hell, maybe don't even make bourbon. Make an American-style whiskey. Stop trying to clone what you can buy at the store for a fair price, right? You're not ever going to clone the stuff on the high end one way or the other. Not even going to get close to it. Not using barrel alternatives, you're not. So I think where people mess up is they go into this going, oh, I'm going to make a bourbon or a traditional rye or whatever. I don't think oak alternatives are good, or barrel alternatives are good for that. I think barrel alternatives are fucking phenomenal if you want to play around with other whiskey categories and really try to do something unique and understand that the flavor you're going to get from it is not going to be bourbon-like. It's not going to be bourbon-like, right? This is where those barrel alternatives really shine, and this is where playing around with wine tank staves, right? There's a million different styles of wine tank staves. Buy them things in, I take them and break them into pieces because, they're usually pretty good sized staves. And I might toast them a little further. I might char them a little further. I might throw them in some wine or some fortified wine or something of that nature, pull them out and throw them into a whiskey. I've been playing around with Amburana quite a bit. If you can find the Amburana chunks or even the chips. Amburana is that one wood that seems like as a chip, it works extremely well as long as you're careful with it and you don't overwhelm the spirit with it, right? Find you some old barrels that are falling apart somewhere, guys. Play around with some used bourbon barrel staves. Those are fun to play around with too, especially with things like apple brandy. Every once in a while, I come across cool barrels via my friends over at Stave and Bean Coffee Company. By the way, go to the store, thealchemistcabinet.com, and pick up the new Stave and Bean / One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute crossover coffee, which we actually aged in a 15-gallon chinqopin oak barrel that had some Amburana staves in it and some other things as well. And we did it was a Applewood smoked malt corn whiskey that they put a beautiful coffee in and matured in there. We also have if you have Ghost, you have everything coffee, which was put into a barrel that was previously an apple brandy barrel. And then after that had a blackberry port wine that I made put into it. So shameless self-promotion aside. So Amburana works well. The spirals. I really like those spirals. A lot of times they work out extremely well. Many times I'll use a lot of these things in conjunction with one another. The barrel I was talking about was from Stave and Bean Coffee. They passed on to me a cognac barrel that they'd aged in. Well, I took that cognac barrel, it was falling apart, and I cut it up into staves. We've been selling some on thealchemistcabinet.com on the store. I cut it up into little stave pieces, and when I cut it, that cognac was still fresh and aromatic and beautiful. And that French oak, it's not easy to get a hold of anyways, and when you do, it tends to be super expensive. I haven't put a light char on it just to change things up, right? And oftentimes what I'll do is I might even make a quote-unquote extract. So I might take a small amount of spirit, cram it full of a bunch of oak, right? Let that extract that wood, and then maybe I'll do that with 3 or 4 different samples of oak and one type of spirit, and then use those extracts to add back into a white spirit as well. I believe we've talked about that before. That's something that I really enjoy doing. I might even get a 15-gallon used barrel from a distillery and fill it up, and then throw some various different oak barrel alternatives in there too. The trick though here is, guys, is you got to experiment with it. I like to if I'm not going to make an extract or something like that, I will front load that spirit heavy with oak for a week or two. I'll go in, I'll pull half of it out, check the spirit, and let it set for another few weeks. Sometimes I'll let it set for a few months, and I just keep checking it until I get what I want. But the trick is, don't go into it thinking that you're going to imitate a barrel, because you're not. You are going to be able to mature the spirit in a different way. One thing that you're never going to get exactly the same as a barrel does is that a barrel breathes. A barrel is actually, I'll tell people all the time, they are great ingredients in shitty storage devices because they breathe. Every time barometric pressure changes, the liquid in that barrel flips around. It gets hot, that liquid expands and goes further in the wood. It gets cold, it contracts back into the wood. Bear that in mind too, whether or not your spirit's hot or cold. If it's hot, you might have some things in the wood that you'd like to have back out of the wood. If it's real cold outside, that barrel's going to contract. You might be pulling tannins out of that wood that you don't want out of that wood. And it changes over time. There are times at work that we won't do barrel picks middle of January and end of August. But if it's real hot or real cold, you don't want to come do a barrel pick because everything's going to taste like shit. So I hope all that made sense to you guys. It was a long rambling video. I apologize for that. As always, reach out to me. You know the places. I'm not going to say it again. I love y'all. Thanks for supporting the channel. It means the world to me. I'll catch you later.